what is the English department for? For most of the 20th century, the answer seemed pretty obvious. It was, the place you went to study the great works of literature, to trace a conversation with beauty and meaning across time from Beowulf to Virginia Woolf, to grapple with the complete works of Shakespeare and of Chaucer many times. It was the place where you studied, in the words of Matthew Arnold, the best that has been thought or said. And in many places it still is. But things have changed. Something very significant has changed. Because the English degree used to be very popular. In 1971, almost 8% of college degrees in America were in English. 8% of all degrees, all bachelor degrees awarded, were in English. That's huge. English departments, by the way, are relatively new additions to the university model. Many of them started being added to the universities in the late 19th century. And a lot of people don't know this, but think about it. Everybody was reading Shakespeare, George Eliot, Charles Dickens. So in the 19th century, when people thought, well, let's add an English department, some objected to it because everybody was reading Shakespeare, Eliot, Chaucer, and many other, and Dickens. It would be like asking today universities to adopt a TikTok department or a YouTube department or a TV department. It's like, well, everybody's watching TV. Why do we need a department about that? Well, that's sort of the way it was back then because everybody was reading many of the great works that are studied academically today. So when the English departments came on, they were very popular and they are very useful degrees, as they always have been. But today, that number of English majors has dropped significantly. Since 2012 to now, the number of English majors has fallen by a third. And the story has so much more to do with than just declining enrollments. It's about a fundamental shift in the mission and purpose of the department. Many English majors today can graduate without ever having read Shakespeare. There are many reasons that contributed to this, but the historical survey across English literature has been replaced by more of a choose-your-own-adventure model. So what happened? Did departments, as some claim, go woke? Or is this simply the result of soaring tuition costs that have pushed students toward more practical degrees? Well, the truth, as always, is more complicated than either of those two answers. In this video, I want to talk about what English departments were like during the height of their time. And this study comes from more of an in-depth analysis that I gave on my Substack post, which is linked below. But for now, I want to take a couple different roads in this video and talk about how the decline of the English degree may actually signal something more significant for non-academic readers, and how a public readership is recovering the ground that English departments lost. So let's talk about the rise and fall of the English degree. To really understand the decline of the English major, you have to examine what it was at its height. So look at a university bulletin from the 1950s. If you look at Harvard's, the English major required a full year survey of English literature from the Anglo-Saxons to modernism. There was a whole 2-semester course on Chaucer where you read everything Chaucer wrote. That's the whole river. I have the Riverside Chaucer somewhere around here. That's huge. Hold up. They read all of this in a whole year. But there was this other 2-semester course on everything that Shakespeare wrote. And that's not just the plays. The course required you to read every play, but also all of his poetry, all of his lyric poetry as well. So you were reading the sonnets, you were reading the tragedies, the comedies, the histories, and the so-called problem plays. So this wasn't unique to Harvard or even the Ivy League. Public universities, like the University of Michigan, which has always had a really strong English department, had similar rigorous requirements. The curriculum had a recognizable core. If you were to take English departments in the mid to late 20th century, you would see that there is this recognizable core of the English tradition, American literature, Shakespeare, and literary history. And many departments put a strong emphasis on world literature too, so you weren't just reading just the English canon. These programs were demanding, they were systematic, and they promised a broad humanistic education. And here's my take on why this changed. And it happened in some respects very slowly, in other respects pretty quickly. So most of the most significant changes happened within maybe a 20-year span. So let's talk about some of the reasons why this happened and what kind of pressures were being put upon the English department so that they renegotiated their identity. So here's a wide sampling of factors. Number one, many English departments abandoned a strong curriculum. We know this because you can actually trace it. For much of the 20th century, English departments had a very recognizable core: the English tradition, Shakespeare, American literature, literary history. But as the idea of the canon began to be challenged and even abandoned, the English department curricula became increasingly unstructured. Departments traded a set of strong required courses for more of a choose-your-own-journey model. This actually makes sense because it was a very thorny debate about the canon. And one of the ways to just kind of ignore the problem was to say, well, what do students want to learn? And let's give them that. So there was this kind of demand, supply and demand relationship that came about. So there arose, secondly, a preference for public universities or even private or religious colleges. So between 1970s and 2010s, students began attending public universities primarily because they were cheaper. I myself, as a community college transfer student, was one of them. I also went to a public university, and like many public universities, they are increasingly interested in the STEM fields. That's the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. That's the money-making fields, at least of today. And so many humanities programs at these institutions were not well funded, for reasons described in a previous article on Substack. But all of this corresponds to the third reason, which is the rise of tuition costs. Significantly, between 1970 and now, tuition has surged well over the rate of inflation. So, by the way, in the 1950s, when these programs were really good, you look at the tuition rates and they were much cheaper. A year at Harvard was $600. By the way, and that was cheaper than Yale or Princeton. $600? That's about $7,000 in today's money. And that's significant, sure. That's nothing to sneeze at. But it's nothing like the 5 to 6 figure a year tuition costs that many universities have today. A fourth reason is that the rise of theory did not help. It's true. I've said before, theory is great. I admire the work of many theorists. The dominance of theory this is my theory, it wasn't really promoted by the great theorists themselves. It was actually their graduate students, the following generation of tenured professors, who established this critical orthodoxy of ideological readings of literature. So, literature was less about the affective, experience and more about this theoretical application of literature to politics, ideology. The fifth reason is that the research model took over English departments. So after the 1970s, the American university model shifted to a more research-driven faculty culture. This means that professors were evaluated and tenured based on their publications, not so much upon their teaching. Teaching is a factor, but not to the extent to which publications are now. And as a result, literature became a specialized academic field, and this corresponds to the rise of theory. Perfectly to the rise of theory. This change meant that educating undergraduates became no longer a very serious metric for job placement. And this leads to the sixth reason, which is the rise of research and scholarship actually pushed out teaching. So the study of English literature had begun as a teaching discipline. It was all about teaching. Over the past 60 years, it transformed slowly into more of a research discipline that we have today, which is a discipline that produces a very specialized scholarship read mostly by other specialists. So intro-level teaching, those great survey courses that were going on in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, that got shifted to underpaid adjuncts. We're doing that work now. Graduate students who are also traditionally underpaid, adjuncts, they're doing the survey courses. And so hiring now prioritizes research agendas, which is great. We need research, but we also, I think, need teaching, and we need good teaching more than ever. Whether a professor could teach was less of a priority in the way things have gone now. But I think the seventh reason, and this is one of the main reasons, why English departments are in decline is I think they've lost public voices. The academy used to be more porous with the public, used to actually have a relationship with the public in a way, or at least the individual professors did. Earlier professors such as Lionel Trilling, Helen Vendler, Harold Bloom, Cleanth Brooks, Northrop Frye, C.S. Lewis, Helen Gardner, they all spoke to and wrote for an educated public. And we have many scholars who are doing this today. But it is becoming increasingly anomalous. When you read these past critics, or these critics who write for the public, you can really see the value of the humanities abundantly. It's very clear. There's no need to defend why the humanities matter, because when you read the humanities, you understand it. When you read literature, art, no one needs to defend that for you. Now many professors have stopped publicly professing. And although there are many professors who still write for the public, the majority seem uninterested in public engagement. And meanwhile, outside of the academy, technological acceleration, short-form entertainment, and technocratic market logic continues to dull the faculties of the reading public, the imagination, and to disintegrate shared meaning in any kind of spiritual fabric that make up the lives of most Americans today. It's no wonder that anti-intellectualism is on the rise now, and that the academy is just getting more and more insular. So, if the American English department is indicative of the whole humanities, I'd say that the whole of humanities have lost cultural influence precisely where and when society needed them the most. So let me talk about the new stewards, because this is, I think, this shift we see happening. Now, there is a decline in public readership, and that decline is related to the decline of the English department, or at least it corresponds to the decline. By all accounts, the state of public literacy has only gotten worse, with reading for pleasure in the U.S. adult population having plummeted over the past 40 years. I think fewer than half of all adults read at least one work of literature nowadays. And according to one report in 2022, less than half adults read at least one book in the past year. Okay, that's pretty significant and pretty terrible. And yet, even as the University English Department has pared back structural, systematic approach to English literature and their curricula, and even though major enrollments have fell and are falling, there remains signs of a renewed public appetite for serious reading and for serious study of literature. So looking out on the state of things now in 2025, it's clear that there are major changes afoot. A major cultural reorientation is underway. I think the 2020s is a good decade for this revival of reading of the classics. There are several online initiatives such as the Catherine Project, such as my work on Versed Community, which demonstrate a renewed desire for encountering works of literature. And they're encountering them in conversation and in rigor. But this is where the story takes the unexpected turn, because as the university departments have retreated, a new movement has been rising outside the academy to recover some lost ground. I call these the new stewards of literacy. They are emerging. I see them every day in online communities. They're autodidacts, as they're called now, lifelong learners and readers who are returning to and expanding the canon for a search of meaning, for a search of beauty, for soul formation. The 19th century poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge called this group of a nation the clerisy. That is, the average readers, teachers, thinkers, frontline workers who preserve the cultural life of a nation. They are reading right now everything from the Book of Job to contemporary poetry. People are buying the classics. They're buying them to study them in groups, forming book clubs, and writing and reading close reading essays voluntarily. Reading is becoming a public commons again. it's, as I said, a very voluntary devotion, not this obligatory hurdle along the path to academic credentialization. That's been a large part of my experience teaching undergraduates, has been dealing with the fact that many of them are there just simply for a credit, which is fine. I took a weather course back at the University of Florida just for credentialization to satisfy my degree requirements. Incredibly boring course, although I'm very interested in the weather. Anyway, that's a bit of a digression. The point is that communal learning, even though not in person, is proving that the past works of literature are being enlarged by the present readership. There's this renewed stewardship that is less bureaucratic, more intimate, less obligatory, more communal, and it may prove the stronger for it. I used to think that the decline of the English department signaled the death of literary study, and I've learned that it really signals a return to literature, to the common life and personal encounter. Reading is returning again to the way it was before it was professionalized by the academic study of it. Now, I believe we need both the tower and the garden. We need a healthy academy, and we also need a healthy reading public. And it's interesting, as the academy grows increasingly corrupt, I see some health returning to the garden, to what Coleridge called the clerisy, to readers who are really interested in expanding their experience through reading. Literature's going back to the public commons. What's happening is a true renaissance of reading. And it's important that this revival grows into a place of creativity, right? We don't need to go back to the golden age of the English department, to go back to a curriculum, as much as I admire a systematic approach to the study of English literature and history. We need to get in touch with the past, but we also need to be allowed to create something new. There needs to be an academic study that gives permission to other readers to further what has been written. We need a new relationship to the canon. It's the difference between studying a fossil of a fern and walking in the woods and seeing the bracken fern living. And what I'm doing on Versed this next year is bringing the academic study of poetry, which is what I've been trained to do, and adding this creative element. So we're going to hear from poets. We're going to have some published poets leading workshops in conjunction with the academic study of the poetry we do, because we need both. We need a revival of literature that feeds both the intellect and the spirit, and one that is willing to encourage a productive and creative relationship to the ever-growing canon. And that, I think, is what our present circumstances offer. So, what will the future look like? I think about this a lot. Will the new stewards of literature go underground, hiding from an oppressive technocratic bureaucracy like the last remnant of readers in Jules Verne's novel Paris in the 20th century? Or, like the Petrarchs of the Renaissance, will they bring to light forgotten literature and usher in a new movement of humanism? Say what you want about the decline of reading. It's pretty terrible, I'll admit it. But something is happening now. While the flames of literacy are dying, the buried coals are heating. And there is much that remains to strengthen.